There you are. You're live. Should just like upload her right there. Bye. Bye. All right. Here we go. The impact of the French Revolution. So there are two sides that are starting to take shape. They're not political parties yet, but eventually they're going to be political parties. They are the Federalists, the Anti-Federalists, aka the Jeffersonian Democratic Republicans. Okay. Washington's first administration ended in 1793, and the formation of the two political groups had emerged. These two, the Jeffersonian Democratic Republicans and the Hamilton Federalists. Jefferson Democratic Republicans, they supported states' rights and smaller government, okay, smaller central government. More power resting in the states. The reason they believe in that is because technically the states are a better representative of the people. Does that make sense? Like California is better represented by Californians than they are by Minnesotans. Okay, people that live there and are a part of it. Hamilton Federalists supported a powerful federal government because they had saw the failures of the Articles of Confederation. They believed that you needed to have a strong central government. And the Bill of Rights was the checks and balances of not having a central government that could control every aspect of your life, right? So that's how they view it. The Bill of Rights in there, we can have a stronger central government because our personal freedoms are protected and guaranteed. And so these are the two sides that are starting to form during this time period. And the French Revolution is going to pull. All right, the Jeffersonian Democratic Republicans are going to support France in the Revolution, and the Hamiltonian Federalists are not. And there's a couple reasons for that. If you remember back to your world history days, the French Revolution is incredibly chaotic and super violent. And, you know, throughout different periods of the French Revolution, you would not call it a democracy. It's a dictatorship, right? Napoleon is an emperor, crowns himself an emperor. Maximilien Robespierre is the head of it, you know, dictatorate, I don't know, whatever you want to call it, but essentially it's a dictatorship as well. And so there were a lot of people in the United States that wanted to back off from that. And as a result, ironically, the Federalists end up kind of supporting or creating stronger ties with the British, even after the Revolutionary War. So the French Revolution starts in 1789, eventually involved many European countries, began peacefully but entered a violent phase. France declared war on Austria. It was pretty violent all along. Things got worse when King Louis was beheaded, the church was attacked, the head rolling of the Reign of Terror began, the guillotine was invented and used to full extent. And that's really when a lot of countries around the world said, and there's a great quote in a British newspaper that said, if that's democracy, we should want no part of it. Because people were being executed all the time. We know about the Reign of Terror from world history. We talked about that. Essentially, you know, secret police, people turning on each other. If you complained about the government, your head got chopped off. You were considered a counter-revolutionary. There's all kinds of, you know, chaos that went on. They became so convinced that the church itself was corrupt and in bed with the monarchy that they created a new calendar that didn't have Sundays. Think about that. Now, there are some good things for France that come out of the French Revolution. Some of the Napoleonic codes and laws were, you know, I guess good things, benefits for them. And eventually, you will see a democracy come out of this, but not really during this time. So it's not clear cut. The Jeffersonian Democrats, they want to support France because France really enables us to win the Revolutionary War. Without French support at the Battle of Yorktown, the French fleet trapping the British in there, a French army on land as well. Do we win the Revolutionary War? Probably, just because it turns into a war of attrition, survival. Well, it takes a long time. It's costing the British a lot of money. They're not as thrilled about fighting it anymore, but this speeds it up. Okay, so because of the French, we were able to win much quicker. So that's why there are, you know, a segment of our population that wants to support France during this as well. This is, I believe, a painting of the storming of the Bastille, and we should see a picture. This is the key to the Bastille. Marquis de Lafayette, who was an advisor to George Washington during the Revolutionary War, he gave this key to Washington as a token of his appreciation to signify, and keep in mind, the initial push of the French Revolution is to create a democracy. Certainly, it becomes super chaotic and it's not what we would consider a democracy for large chunks of time. But this key is hanging in Mount Vernon, in George Washington's home.
Have you been there?
Yeah.
Yeah. Did you go on a trip once?
Yes.
You did?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's great, isn't it? That's the coolest. That's the coolest artifact by far.
Yeah, that is the coolest artifact by far.
It's like, thanks for the inspiration.
Right. It is pretty cool. I mean, it's like hanging by a staircase. And I would say in a relatively nondescript location. You just walk in and it's like, hey, there's the key to the Bastille. Now, the irony is in the Bastille that there really wasn't as many political prisoners there as there were supposed to be, and they were trying to get weapons, and the commander of the Bastille essentially surrenders it to try to avoid violence, and then they chop off his head, stick it on a pike, and parade it around town. So, it was a little bit violent. All right, Jeffersonian Democratic Republicans wanted to support the French in their war against the British. The Federalists opposed. The war has spread beyond its borders. We know with Marie Antoinette being Austrian, Austria is going to declare war. France, especially during Napoleon times of the Revolution, is going to try to expand greatly. Napoleon, for all of his faults, was a brilliant military leader and strategist, and very successful, which is how he ascends to power quickly in this chaotic time in France, because France had been attacked by many neighboring countries. He has military successes, and as a result, he becomes very popular. It rises to the level, I guess you could say, of emperor. Now, one of the reasons the Federalists will oppose is because they are trading primarily with the British. Many of the Federalists are wealthy merchants in the New England region, and their trade involves trading with the British, not the French. There's so much chaos in France that, France's, I would say, level of trade, in the world economy has gone down, and the British has gone up. The British are continuing to expand around the globe. They have a huge demand for raw materials, and the Federalists are making a great deal of money off of British trade. And if they support France against the British, then they're going to lose that. Does that make sense? And the amount of demand coming from France is certainly not going to be able to pick up that slack. Washington doesn't want any part of it. Okay? If you watched the video from yesterday, we talked about Washington's going to give us advice. He's going to say, don't form political parties that will tear this country apart. We didn't follow that one. He'll say, don't get involved in treaties with European countries because they fight each other all the time. I'm not going to necessarily follow that one either. And the third one is basically presidents should serve more than 2 terms because they will get too much power. And that's why he leaves after the second one. All right, and every president followed that all the way up to Franklin Delano Roosevelt. He was the only one to be elected to 4 terms. And then he dies during his 4th term. And that's when they changed the Constitution and say, yeah, Washington was right. We should limit it to 2 terms. So we have term limits for the president. So he issues a neutrality proclamation in 1793, stating that the country's neutrality from the Britain-France War. He was backed by Hamilton. Neutrality means you can trade with either side. Okay? But it is mostly due to trade with Britain. All right, so we have our original 13 states over here, and what we're going to see is once the United States gained its independence, that proclamation line of 1763 is gone. And we will see a flood of settlers moving into this area. The Ohio River Valley through here is really fertile land, and there was tons of land speculation that was taking place. In other words, people kind of buying land sight unseen. And states that, like Virginia, at one point in time, claimed basically part of Minnesota, land all the way to the Mississippi River. And other states hadn't been established yet. But, the Native Americans still lived there. And so the British, they don't have a problem right now giving the Native Americans guns and saying, you want to stop the flow of Americans coming in here, just start shooting. They do. Embroilments with Britain. For years, the British had retained the frontier posts on U.S. soil, all in defiance of the peace treaty of 1783. Basically, we couldn't make them leave. We told them to leave, but we didn't have the military power to make them leave. We win the Revolutionary War because it became a war of attrition, and the British didn't want to fight it anymore. It cost them a lot of money, and we are fighting on our home soil. We're fighting for our homes and our livelihoods, and they have to send people over. They don't have enough troops to do that. Have them all around the world. They actually hired German mercenaries known as Hessians, which, very topical for now, is where we get the myth of the Headless Horseman, the Halloween myth. The Headless Horseman was a Hessian who had his head blown off by a cannon at the Battle of Trenton, New Jersey, allegedly. He kept riding, or was just stuck in the saddle. The London government did not want to abandon valuable fur trade in the Great Lakes region. British agents openly sold firearms to the Miami Confederacy, an alliance of 8 Indian nations who terrorized Americans. A lot of times when we think of Miami, we think of Florida, correct? How many of you knew there was a Miami University in Ohio? Right? The Red Hawks. Home of Ben Roethlisberger. For those of you that are NFL fans, pretty sure he played at Miami. Yeah, that comes from the Miami Confederacy, right? It's a group of Native American tribes. The Jeffersonians felt that American should again fight the British in defense of America's liberties. The Federalists opposed the action because Hamilton's hopes for economic development depended on trade with Britain. Now think about who they represent. Federalists, again, represent mostly those wealthy traders in the New England region. Their money depends upon trade with England. The Jeffersonian Democratic Republicans, they represent the average American. The average American is looking to this land as it being our land, which it rightfully was at the end of the war. However, there were Native Americans there who also had a rightful claim to that land, which then brings about conflict. The British are inciting this conflict by encouraging the Native Americans to shoot us, not to work with us, and by giving them weapons and not abandoning those forts. And so, your average American has, I would say, a fairly strong level of disdain towards the British, especially if they're on those frontier lands. This is part of Pontiac's Rebellion. Jay's Treaty and Washington's Farewell. In a last attempt to avoid war, President Washington sent Chief Justice John Jay to London in 1794 to negotiate. Opposed by the Democratic Republicans, because keep in mind, they're frustrated with the British, Jay hammered out a treaty, Jay's Treaty, in which the British promised to evacuate the chain of posts on U.S. soil, pay for damages for the seizures of American ships, which they will continue to do after this, by the way. Britain did not agree to anything about future maritime seizures or about supplying arms to Indians. So they said they would leave, they would pay for damages, but they would not stop taking our ships. And that's a policy called impressment, and taking our sailors too, for that matter. And that will eventually lead us down the road of war in the War of 1812. It's one of the biggest reasons, is basically right here. So Jay's Treaty is a bit of a stopgap, right? It prevents war in 1794, but literally 18 years later, we are at war with the British. The benefit to the British for signing this treaty is that they would continue to get money that was owed to them by American merchants for pre-Revolutionary War accounts.
Okay,
I was just watching it go across the camera.
anybody tuned in?
I don't even know how, yeah, one person, which is probably actually just me. So. All right, Jay's treaty is going to cause the Spanish to panic a little bit. They feared an Anglo-American alliance, meaning British-American alliance, to strike a deal with the U.S. In Pinckney's treaty in 1795 with Spain, Spain granted Americans free navigation of the Mississippi River and large disputed territory north of Florida. Okay, so kind of the area between Georgia and Florida, which is today Georgia now. And this free navigation of the Mississippi River is going to be a big deal. And various different countries at different times will close it off to us. Obviously, the flow of materials to get onto a world market anyways, the most efficient means of transportation is the river system. The Mississippi River is like a giant superhighway. So being able to freely navigate the Mississippi River and get down to, what will be New Orleans, out into the Gulf, you can trade or, engage in world commerce. So it's a big deal. And I've talked about this numerous times, but in Washington's farewell address, he urged against permanent alliances. He leaves office in 1797. Also warned us about political parties, which seems super prophetic today. All right, John Adams becomes the second president of the United States. He was Washington's vice president. He beats Thomas Jefferson to become the second president in 1797. Hamilton became the leader of the Federalist Party, sometimes known as the High Federalist. We would consider John Adams a Federalist, even though technically the political party isn't 100% in existence yet. That is his kind of school of thought. He is a believer in a strong central government. And that becomes important, especially during the formative years under the Constitution. This is when we will see the different battles to try to interpret the meaning of the Constitution. It will get fleshed out during this time. There's Madison, or Adams. All right, France is very upset by Jay's treaty, and it started capturing American ships. So now the British are taking our ships, the French are taking our ships, and they can all do this, by the way, because we don't have much of a navy. There isn't a whole lot we can do about it. And so they're seizing our ships, seizing our sailors, and President John Adams is going to send John Marshall to France to negotiate in 1797, hoping to meet Talleyrand, who was the French foreign minister. And I did underline a lot here, and to be honest with you, it took me quite a bit of time just to figure out who X, Y, and Z were, but just out of my own curiosity, I wanted to know their names. But they're often referred to in most history books as just X, Y, Z, these three go-betweens. And essentially, they said, and keep in mind, France is in tremendous turmoil during the Revolution, up and down, who's in charge, who's not in charge, people are losing their heads, all kinds of stuff going on. But essentially, they said, you need to pay us $250,000 just to talk. And, you know, whether out of principle or the fact that we didn't have $250,000 to throw around, Marshall says, no, the heck with that, we're out. And we leave. Infuriated, and I tried to just narrow this down a little bit for you, but the XYZ affair, which is because that's what the names, the code names were given to the three French officials who demanded the bribe, America began preparations for war. It becomes kind of an unofficial war with France. So the Navy Department was created. This is my favorite part. The three-ship Navy was expanded. We had 3 ships in our Navy. Now you know why the French and the British were taking our ships, because they could. Think of the coastline that we have to defend. And we had 3 ships in our Navy. They agreed to make it a little bit bigger. The United States Marine Corps was reestablished. The Marine Corps, the job of the Marine Corps is to essentially, at this time, you serve on ships and to be the protection on ships. So, in reality, the Marine Corps is a part of the Navy, or a branch of the Navy. Originally, just in case you want to know, the Marine Corps was established on November 10th, 1775 in Tunn's Tavern, Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. That's why it says reestablished. It was disbanded for a short time. But every Marine knows that we were born in a bar. It's part of the tradition. When you're in the Marine Corps, you get a book about that thick, and it's all about the history of the Marine Corps. And when you're in boot camp, it is just constant. They're asking questions all the time. You have to know it all. It's kind of cool when you're a history guy and a Marine. Talk about history all the time. All right, this is a political cartoon kind of making fun of the French and the French demands, living kind of aloof. Expansion of our Navy, rapidly trying to build ships. All right, Adams puts patriotism above party because France did not want another enemy. It said that if the Americans sent another negotiator, then they would receive the proper respect. Napoleon becomes the dictator of France, eager to free his hands of a potential enemy. Napoleon signed the Convention of 1800 with the American representative John Jay that annulled the alliance between France and America that had existed since the Revolutionary War. Because technically, we had told the French during the Revolutionary War, if you help us, we'll help you someday. And again, that was one of the frameworks for the Jeffersonian Democratic Republicans saying, hey, we said we would help them if they had, an issue. They were definitely having an issue, put it mildly. And so now they said, you don't have to follow that anymore. We understand you're a brand new country. You have 3 ships in your Navy. You're not going to be much help to anybody. The convention also called for France to return captured American ships, for the U.S. to pay the damage claims of the American shippers, damages that were caused by France. So they'll give the ship back, but let's say it had, $20,000 worth of cargo. Well, then the U.S. government was going to pay for the cargo. That's the compromise there. We get the ship back, but we are going to pay for the damages or the lost freight or whatever it might have been that was on there. The reality of this is Napoleon at this stage of the game is not looking towards expanding near the United States. All right, he wants to head east across Europe. He's going to be on his way to Russia soon. And the Russian winter will kill off his army. But that's where his sights are set. And so he wants to just kind of get rid of this issue because he doesn't want any potential problems with another enemy somewhere else. It will not always stay that way. I guess the point of what I'm trying to say here is Napoleon doesn't necessarily feel threatened by the United States. He just doesn't want to have to deal with it anymore. Right? His goal, his mindset is to head east, not west. Later on, he's going to change his mind, especially after the Russian winter, and he will have an idea of coming here. We'll talk about that at a later date. All right, the Federalist witch hunt. To decrease the number of pro-Jeffersonians, the Federalist Congress passed a series of oppressive laws aimed at aliens. So this is 2 things that I underlined here because you have to know what they are, the Alien Laws and the Sedition Act. Aliens are not coming from outer space, obviously. This is foreigners who are coming to America. If you're a brand new immigrant into this country, you tended to be a Jeffersonian Democratic Republican because really the Federalists were much more representative of the issues surrounding wealthy Americans. And if you're a poor immigrant, you're not a wealthy American. Does that make sense? And the Federalists realized this too, and they realized that very quickly in a democracy, they were going to lose power with the number of immigrants that are coming into this country and are, aligning themselves politically with the group that makes the most sense for them, which is the Jeffersonian Democratic Republicans. So these alien laws raise the residence requirements for aliens who desire to become citizens from 5 years to 14. So make it so, and if you're not a citizen, you can't vote. So you're changing that. They also stated that the president could deport or jail foreigners in times of peace or hostilities. Imagine if that law existed today. The president at any time could put foreigners in jail. No cost, just could. The Sedition Act stated that anyone who impeded the policies of the government or falsely defamed its officials will be liable to a heavy fine and imprisonment. It was aimed primarily at newspapers. That is a straight-out attack on the First Amendment, which was put in to try to prevent these things from happening. Obviously, we have libel laws. If you print something that is not true, you could be held liable. But if you question decisions made by the government, that's really the job of the newspaper. All right? I think we've talked about this before, maybe not in this class, but journalism is supposed to be the watchdog of democracy. To ask questions, to bring attention to things. They don't want that to happen. So now, actions of the Federalists are, I would say, damaging the potential for the Constitution to be a successful form of government. So these are referred to as the Alien and Sedition Acts. One of my favorite little paintings here. Things are getting very chaotic in Congress. You can't tell if they're dancing, laughing, or beating each other over the heads with clubs. It's like a Charlie Brown cartoon. All right, the Virginia and Kentucky resolutions. Kentucky and Virginia passed resolutions that stated that states had the right to refuse laws created by the government. Virtually no other state followed the two state resolutions. These resolutions were in direct response to the Alien Sedition Acts. Can a state really pass a law that says, never mind, you don't have to follow the federal government laws? The answer is no. The Constitution is the supreme law of the land, okay? We will establish something known as the Supremacy Clause, like the order in which things go. Like that hasn't happened yet, though. We'll talk about that. We're going to take a look at one of the next couple chapters here. I think it's 5 or 6 landmark Supreme Court cases that establish how everything is going to work. And so what we're seeing here is an attempt by a state to say, that law is stupid. We're not going to follow it. If that were the case, we would have got rid of Wisconsin a long time ago. Which it appears Wisconsin is doing all by itself via COVID. See, the Wisconsin football team had to shut down Badgers because they have like 8 coaches and 24 players infected.
Jeez.
So they had to shut down. They had to cancel their game.
Yeah, well, are they done, or just
21 days for sure.
Gotcha.
I don't know if their 4th string quarterback is the only guy who does not have COVID. So if they do play after this week, they're on their 4th string quarterback. They have to play 6 games to qualify to be in the Big Ten playoff.
Yeah.
So all this is good for Minnesota because Wisconsin actually looked pretty good.
Yeah.
And if they don't get 6 games in, it doesn't matter. They can't be the champs.
Exactly.
Okay, we're going to stop on this one here. So Federalists versus Democratic Republicans. Oh, hold on one second. That's the last one. Sweet, we made it. Victory, you know what that means. Tomorrow's free day for y'all. The one thing that you guys will all probably listen to on here, tomorrow is a free day. You do not have to do anything because this is the end of the notes. Hamilton Federalists supported a strong central government. They believed that the government should support private enterprise, not interfere with it. Remember, they are virtually solely represented by those wealthy merchant traders in the New England area, okay? Wealthy business people. Jeffersonian anti-federalists, or the Jeffersonian Democratic Republicans, demanded a weak central government and supported states' rights. They feared landless citizens because they thought they could become political pawns of those who did own land. Like they could be persuaded by the Federalists or bribed, if you will. So they really want every citizen to have land and to become vested in the interests of their land. Does that make sense? Like if you come in and you don't have land, but you live in a city, if you will, and you work as a shipbuilder, but you don't own land, you're probably going to politically support whatever your boss supports because that makes more money for you. Is that clicking? Understand that? So they want to get everybody out of the city, so to speak, give them their land because it looks like there's a ton of land available. And of course, we know there are Native Americans on that land, and there's going to be conflicts over that land. But they're trying to get people out onto the land so they can be their own independent, I don't want to say contractors, but have their own level of independence. That is our last writing slide anyways. I'll click through the other ones here very quickly. I think Wyatt's done writing.
Yeah, go ahead.
Or he's given up one or the other.
I'm getting up.
This is the two political parties. You can see a breakdown. If you want to take a look at that, that's it in your textbook too on page 198. That's Jefferson. And there is the chronology. All right. Have a tremendous weekend. Did you ever talk